had been for 12 years when the transport ship Endeavour suffered catastrophic engine failure above Prime. The evacuation pods launched in chaos, scattered across the planet's blood-red surface like seeds in a hurricane. His pod crashed through the canopy of what the survey data had called aggressive flora, trees with bark like rusted metal and thorns that dripped corrosive sap. The impact knocked him unconscious. When he woke, the pod's emergency systems were dead, and the acrid smell of alien atmosphere burned his nostrils through the cracked seal. His oxygen reserves showed 18 hours remaining. The emergency beacon blinked weakly, but even if rescue came, they wouldn't find him under this metallic canopy. Activated the external cameras and felt his stomach drop. The survey reports had been wrong about everything. This wasn't just a hostile world, it was a... Through the static-filled display, he watched creatures that classification tear each other apart in savage combat. Six-limbed predators with crystalline teeth hunted in packs, while armored herbivores fought back with bone spikes that could punch through steel. Every plant seemed designed to kill, every animal evolved for war. The pod's hull groaned under the weight of something massive overhead. A creature the size of a small building, all chitin and fury, tested the strength of the branches above him. One of its claws, easily 3 meters long, scraped against the pod's outer shell with a sound like grinding metal, held his breath until it moved on. He checked his equipment inventory. 1 emergency medical kit, 3 days of ration bars, a basic multi-tool, his research tablet now cracked and useless, no weapons. The Galactic Council had strict regulations about bringing firearms to undeveloped worlds, even for scientists. Those regulations seemed impossibly naive now. The pod's atmospheric readings flickered and stabilized. The air outside was technically breathable for humans, though filled with spores and particulates that would probably kill him slowly if the predators didn't kill him quickly. He had 2 choices: stay in the pod and suffocate, or venture into a world where everything wanted him dead. Chose the third option. He would survive, but on his own terms. His first tool came from the pod itself. The emergency beacon contained rare Earth elements that sparked violently when exposed to the alien atmosphere. He carefully extracted the components, fashioning a crude but effective fire starter. The pod's insulation provided tinder that caught easily in this oxygen-rich environment. The first night nearly killed him. He found shelter in a cave formed by the roots of a massive tree, its interior lined with bioluminescent fungi that cast an eerie green glow. The sounds outside were nightmarish roars, screams, the crack of breaking bone. Something with too many legs scuttled past his hiding spot, leaving a trail of acidic slime that hissed against the cave floor. He learned quickly that everything here operated on predator-prey dynamics pushed to extremes. The herbivores were living siege engines, covered in natural armor and bristling with defensive spikes. The carnivores were biological weapons, refined by millions of years of evolutionary arms races. And somewhere in between lurked the scavengers, smaller, faster, and infinitely more cunning. By the 3rd day, had mapped the basic ecosystem around his crash site. The metallic trees contained a network of hollow chambers where smaller creatures nested. The fungi weren't just decorative. They were part of a complex chemical warfare system, releasing different toxins based on the threat level they detected. Even the ground itself was alive in places, carpeted with organisms that could distinguish between predator and prey by analyzing chemical signatures. His first successful hunt came by accident. A creature he dubbed a part bird, part nightmare had been stalking him through the underbrush. When it finally attacked, rolled aside, and the creature's momentum carried it into one of the chemical-producing fungi. The toxins that would have been merely irritating to him proved lethal to this physiology. The meat was barely edible even when cooked, but it represented something more important than sustenance. For the first time since crashing, felt a spark of hope. If he could understand this world's biological systems, he might survive long enough for rescue to arrive. He used this naturally sharp claws to improve his tools, its hollow bones to create better fire starters, its hide to patch his damaged clothing. Every part of the creature served a purpose, and nothing went to waste. The scavengers that gathered for the remains taught him which parts were valuable and which were poisonous by their feeding behavior. The nights grew easier as he learned to read the sounds of the forest. Different predators had different hunting patterns, different territorial boundaries. The 6-limbed pack hunters, which he called slashers, avoided areas where the larger bone crushers left scent markings. The aerial predators rarely flew during the planet's brief twilight period, when electromagnetic storms in the upper atmosphere interfered with their navigation. By the end of his first week, had established a rough daily routine. Dawn was for gathering edible fungi, useful materials, fresh water from the metallic trees' reservoir chambers. Midday was for observation and mapping, staying hidden while the most aggressive predators competed for territory. Afternoon was for crafting and improving his tools. Evening was for moving to a new shelter, never staying in the same place twice. His scientific training proved invaluable in ways he'd never expected. The classification systems he'd learned for peaceful worlds applied here too, just pushed to violent extremes. The chemical analysis skills he'd used to study alien plant life now helped him identify which substances were toxic and which were useful. Most importantly, his years of studying predator-prey relationships gave him insights into behavior patterns that kept him alive. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. This world demanded strength, speed, and ruthlessness, felt his body adapting, his reflexes sharpening, his muscles hardening from constant tension and movement. The soft academic was being forged into something harder, something more suited to this place of endless war. 3 weeks after the crash, he encountered his first real test. A pack of slashers had cornered him in a dead-end canyon, their crystalline teeth glinting in the harsh sunlight. 6 of them, each the size of a large wolf but far more intelligent. They moved with coordinated precision, cutting off his escape routes one by one. Had no weapons except his improvised tools and his understanding of their biology. He'd observed these creatures for weeks, noted their weaknesses. Their pack coordination broke down when their alpha was challenged directly. Their crystalline teeth, while incredibly sharp, were also brittle under the right kind of stress. When the alpha charged, didn't run. Instead, he grabbed a handful of the toxin-producing fungi and threw them directly at the creature's sensitive olfactory organs. The biological warfare that evolved between species here worked just as well for an educated human. The alpha reeled back, temporarily blinded and confused, and in that moment of chaos, struck. His improvised spear, tipped with a claw and hardened by fire, found the gap in the creature's natural armor. The alpha fell, and the pack scattered in confusion. Had won his first real victory against this world's predators. That night, as he processed the slasher's remains by firelight, felt something fundamental shift inside him. He was no longer just surviving, he was adapting, learning, becoming something that could not only exist in this place but thrive in it. The slasher's hide would make better armor, its claws would become better weapons, its bones contained minerals he could use to improve his tools. But more than that, its defeat had earned him something precious in this world: respect. The scavengers that watched from the shadows no longer looked at him like easy prey. As the alien constellations wheeled overhead, began to plan. Rescue would come eventually, but when it did, he wouldn't be the same helpless academic who had crashed here weeks ago. This world was forging him into something new, something harder, something that understood the fundamental truth that had shaped every creature here, that survival belonged to those willing to fight for it with everything they had. The crackling fire cast dancing shadows on the canyon walls, and in those shadows saw glimpses of what he was becoming. Not just a survivor, but a predator. And for the first time since crashing on this nightmare world, he smiled. 2 months after the crash, had become something the rescue teams wouldn't recognize. His soft, academic hands were now calloused and permanently stained with the blood of creatures that had tried to make him prey. The clean-shaven had grown a beard that helped mask his human scent from the more sensitive predators. His clothes, originally standard-issue research gear, had been replaced piece by piece with armor crafted from his kills. The slasher hide formed the base layer, flexible enough for movement, but tough enough to stop most claws and teeth. Over it, he wore plates of chitin harvested from a creature he'd killed in the second month, something the size of a rhinoceros with armor like ceramic steel. The helmet was carved from the skull of a bone crusher, complete with the creature's natural electromagnetic shielding that protected him from the atmospheric storms. But the real change went deeper than equipment. Moved differently now, with the fluid grace of a predator who'd learned that hesitation meant death. His senses had adapted to this world's demands. He could track by scent, identify threats by sound, and read the territorial markings that kept the various species from constant warfare. The territory he'd claimed covered roughly 50 square kilometers of prime hunting ground. It included 3 water sources, 2 cave systems perfect for shelter, and the richest concentration of useful resources he'd found. More importantly, it was strategically positioned at the intersection of several major predator territories, allowing him to play them against each other when necessary. His reputation among the local fauna had grown. The scavengers followed him now, knowing that his kills would provide them with food. The smaller predators avoided his marked boundaries, having learned through bitter experience that the strange, two-legged creature was not easy prey. Even some of the apex predators had begun to show him a grudging respect. The breakthrough came when he encountered the Shadow Stalkers. These creatures were unlike anything else on Prime. They hunted in perfect silence, their bodies capable of bending light around them for near-complete invisibility. Traditional predators relied on strength, speed, or armor. The Shadow Stalkers relied on intelligence and stealth, making them perhaps the most dangerous hunters on the planet. First detected them through their absence rather than their presence. Animals that should have been active went silent. Scent trails that should have led somewhere simply vanished. Even the ever-present sounds of combat and territorial disputes faded to nothing in their hunting grounds. He spent 3 weeks studying them, using every trick he'd learned to avoid detection while mapping their behavior patterns. They were pack hunters like the slashers, but infinitely more sophisticated. They used coordinated strategies that would have impressed military tacticians, complete with feints, ambushes, and tactical retreats. Most fascinating was their tool use. Unlike every other species he'd encountered, the Shadow Stalkers crafted weapons, not just simple clubs or sharpened sticks, but complex instruments designed for specific purposes. Bone needles filled with paralytic venom, weighted nets woven from incredibly strong fibers, blades that vibrated at frequencies that could shatter even the toughest armor. When the pack finally decided he was enough of a threat to eliminate, was ready. The attack came at dawn, during the brief period when the planet's electromagnetic field was strongest and most predators sought shelter. 6 Shadow Stalkers materialized from what had seemed like empty air, their weapons gleaming with deadly purpose. But had learned more than just survival in his months on this world. He'd learned to think like them. The trap he'd prepared was elegantly simple. A false camp in the center of a clearing, complete with the heat signature of a sleeping human and the scent markers he'd established around his other shelters. But underneath the apparent campsite, he'd spent days preparing a network of tunnels based on the designs he'd seen in the creature's own hunting grounds. When the Shadow Stalkers struck at the decoy, emerged from below, using their own tactics against them. The weapons he'd crafted were based on their designs, but improved through his understanding of metallurgy and engineering. Blades that sang with harmonic frequencies, nets that tightened automatically when triggered, poisons extracted from the most toxic fungi on the planet. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes, but it changed everything. When it was over, 5 Shadow Stalkers lay dead, their leader mortally wounded. But instead of finishing the kill, did something that no predator on this world had ever done. He offered mercy. The wounded leader, a creature he would later name after the planet itself, stared at him with eyes that held intelligence far beyond animal cunning. In that moment, a communication passed between them that transcended species barriers, had proven his strength, but more importantly, he'd shown restraint. In a world where power meant everything, mercy was a display of supreme confidence. Over the following weeks, a partnership developed. His pack had been decimated, leaving the creature vulnerable to rivals and scavengers, needed allies who could match his growing ambitions. The arrangement started as simple mutual benefit, but evolved into something more complex. The Shadow Stalkers possessed knowledge that even scientific training couldn't match. They understood the deeper currents of this world, migration patterns that spanned continents, seasonal changes that could reshape entire ecosystems, hidden resources that most surface dwellers never discovered. In exchange, shared his own knowledge of metallurgy, chemistry, and engineering. Together, they began crafting weapons that combined alien biology with human innovation. Blades forged from the bones of apex predators, but shaped according to principles of materials science. Armor that incorporated the best features of multiple species while maximizing protection and mobility. Tools that could serve multiple purposes, each one a masterpiece of form and function. The project that would define transformation began in his 4th month on the planet. Deep in the heart of his territory lay the remains of an ancient battlefield where 2 massive predators had fought and killed each other. The creatures were unlike anything in his taxonomic record's apex predators that had grown beyond the normal constraints of biology. One was essentially a living fortress, armored in bone plates that registered as nearly diamond hard on his improvised testing equipment. The other had been built for speed and lethality, its skeleton composed of some organic metal that retained its strength even after death. Both creatures had died locked in combat, their remains preserved by the unique chemical composition of the soil. Spent weeks studying the skeletons, understanding their structure and composition. The metal bones of the speed predator contained elements he'd never seen before, materials that seemed to exist in quantum superposition, simultaneously flexible and rigid, depending on the stresses applied to them. The armor plates of the fortress creature were layered composites that distributed impacts across their entire surface area. With his help, he began the delicate process of harvesting and reshaping these materials. The work required techniques borrowed from both human metallurgy and alien crafting methods. Heat alone wasn't enough. The materials responded to electromagnetic fields, sonic frequencies, and chemical catalysts in ways that challenged everything he thought he knew about matter. The sword took shape slowly, each step requiring innovations in technique and understanding. The blade itself was forged from the speed predator's spine, its quantum metal structure allowing it to cut through virtually any material. The guard was shaped from the fortress creature's armor plates, providing protection while maintaining perfect balance. The handle incorporated neural fibers from both creatures, creating a weapon that seemed to respond to the wielder's intentions. But the true masterpiece was the sword's edge. Using principles he'd learned from studying the Shadow Stalker's vibrating weapons, created a blade that could oscillate at frequencies that disrupted molecular bonds. It wasn't just sharp, it was capable of cutting through the very forces that held matter together. The finished weapon was unlike anything that had ever existed on this world or any other. It combined the best elements of dozens of species with human engineering principles, creating something that transcended the simple violence of natural predators. It was elegant and terrifying, a tool of war that was also a work of art. When first tested the sword against the trunk of one of the metallic trees, the blade passed through the organic steel like it was water. The tree, which had stood for centuries as an immovable landmark, toppled with barely a whisper. Even who had seen every form of violence this world could produce, seemed awed by the weapon's capabilities. News of the sword's creation spread through the predator networks in ways was only beginning to understand. Creatures communicated through chemical markers, territorial displays, and complex behavioral patterns that served as a form of primitive language. The message was clear: something new had emerged in their world, something that changed the fundamental rules of survival. The first challenges came within days. Apex predators that had never shown interest in his territory suddenly began probing his defenses. Pack hunters that had learned to avoid him started testing their luck again. The ecological balance he'd carefully maintained was shifting, and he found himself at the center of a storm that threatened to consume everything he'd built. But was no longer the helpless academic who had crashed here months ago. He was something new, forged by this world's endless conflicts and enhanced by his own knowledge and creativity. When the challenges came, he met them with steel and fire, proving again and again that he belonged at the top of this world's savage hierarchy. The sword sang its deadly song through armor and flesh, teaching the hard lessons that kept this world's predators alive. Respect through strength, territory through conquest, survival through the willingness to do whatever it took to see another dawn. As the planetary day cycle moved toward its violent noon, stood at the edge of his territory and watched the horizon. Somewhere out there, rescue ships might eventually come. But when they did, they wouldn't find a victim waiting for salvation. They would find something that this world had created: a predator armed with the finest weapon ever forged, ready to show the galaxy what humanity could become when all pretense of civilization was stripped away. 8 months after the crash, the rescue ships arrived to find a world transformed. The Redemption, a heavy cruiser equipped for dangerous extractions, dropped out of hyperspace expecting to search for survivors on a hostile but manageable planet. What they found instead challenged everything they thought they knew about human adaptability and alien ecosystems. Captain Sarah studied the initial survey reports with growing confusion. The biodiversity readings were completely wrong. The number of apex predator species had somehow increased by 30% since the original survey. More puzzling were the territorial markers the ships were detecting. Complex chemical signatures that suggested not just intelligence, but civilization. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Torres from the science station, we're picking up what looks like agricultural development in Sector 7. Organized settlements, planned resource allocation, even what might be trade routes. But according to our files, this planet had no intelligent species. The search for survivors began with aerial reconnaissance, but the teams found themselves frustrated by sophisticated camouflage and defensive measures. Twice, landing parties reported being tracked by unseen observers. Electronic equipment failed in ways that suggested deliberate interference. It was as if the planet itself had learned to defend against technology. The breakthrough came when communications officer picked up a transmission on emergency frequencies. The voice that came through was human, but changed in ways that made even the hardened rescue veterans uncomfortable. Rescue Vessel Redemption, this is Doctor of the survey ship Endeavor. I acknowledge your presence and welcome you to my world. However, you are currently violating the territorial boundaries of several Alliance members. Please adjust your flight path to coordinates I'm transmitting now, or face the consequences. Captain stared at the comm unit. Doctor, this is Captain. We're here to extract survivors from the Endeavor disaster. What do you mean by Alliance members? The response came after a pause that suggested careful consideration. Captain, I am the only human survivor, but I am no longer alone. This world has taught me much about survival and leadership. I have formed alliances with the local species. We maintain peace through strength and mutual respect. Your presence threatens that peace. Doctor, we're here to take you home. The Galactic Council has declared this world off-limits to further exploration. It's too dangerous for human habitation. Home, the voice that came back carried undertones that made the comm operators instinctively reach for their weapons. Captain, I am home. This world has given me everything I need. Purpose, power, and the clarity that comes from understanding what humanity can truly become when freed from the constraints of civilization. Against protocol, Captain ordered a full atmospheric descent to investigate the coordinates had provided. What they found all their expectations about both alien worlds and human nature. The settlement stretched across a series of interconnected canyons, a fusion of natural cave systems and deliberate construction. At first glance, it looked like the kind of fortified position that military engineers might build if they had unlimited time and exotic materials. But closer inspection revealed innovations that spoke to a deeper understanding of both alien biology and human engineering principles. The walls were living tissue-modified bone and chitin that could repair itself while maintaining structural integrity beyond anything in human construction databases. The defenses included creatures that had clearly been bred for specific purposes, their natural weaponry enhanced through selective breeding and technological augmentation. Even the air itself seemed to carry warnings, charged with chemical markers that spoke of danger to anyone capable of interpreting them. But most disturbing were the inhabitants. The landing party's first glimpse of the Alliance members came when shadow stalkers materialized from apparently empty air, their weapons raised but their posture suggesting caution rather than immediate aggression. These were not wild animals. They moved with purpose, communicated through complex signals, and demonstrated technology that rivaled anything in the human arsenal. Emerged from the central structure like something out of legend. 8 months on this world had transformed him into something that straddled the line between human and apex predator. His armor was clearly custom-made, incorporating elements from dozens of species while maintaining functionality that surpassed standard military equipment. But it was the sword at his side that made even seasoned Marines take an involuntary step backward. The weapon was beautiful and terrible, its blade seeming to distort light around its edge while emanating a barely audible harmonic that suggested terrible destructive potential. When moved, the sword moved with him as if it were an extension of his will rather than a separate tool. Everything about him suggested controlled lethality, a predator confident in his dominance. "Welcome to my world, Captain," said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute command. "I trust your teams understand that they are guests here, subject to local law and custom." Captain found herself struggling to maintain diplomatic protocol while processing what she was seeing. "Doctor, I'm under orders to bring you back to human space. The Council is concerned about your and the implications of human presence on this world." The Council? Smile held no warmth. The same council that sent unarmed scientists to a war world, then classified it as unsuitable when their lack of preparation led to disaster. "Tell me, Captain, What has the Council accomplished while I've been building something that actually works? He gestured toward the settlement around them, where various species worked together with an efficiency that spoke to careful planning and mutual benefit. I've created something new here, a society based on merit and strength rather than political maneuvering. These creatures accept me as an equal because I've proven myself worthy of their respect. Can you say the same about human space? The tour that followed challenged every assumption the rescue team had about alien intelligence and human adaptability. The Alliance had built wasn't a crude dominance hierarchy, but a sophisticated civilization that combined the best aspects of each member species. The Shadow Stalkers provided intelligence and stealth capabilities. Armored herbivores served as living construction equipment. Flying predators acted as scouts and messengers across vast distances. But the real revelation came when they witnessed in action. A territorial dispute between two predator species had escalated beyond the normal boundaries, threatening to spill into the settlement itself. Instead of calling for backup or seeking shelter, walked directly into the conflict zone. What followed was not a battle, but a demonstration of absolute mastery. The sword moved in patterns that seemed to defy physics, deflecting attacks while delivering precise cuts that disabled without killing. But more impressive was his understanding of predator psychology. He spoke to them in their own language, not words, but displays of dominance and territorial challenge that transcended species barriers. Within minutes, both groups had withdrawn, acknowledging his authority over the disputed territory. The settlement's boundaries expanded by several square kilometers without a drop of blood being spilled. The rescue team watched in stunned silence as apex predators that could have torn apart a military squad simply accepted the judgment of a single human. You see, explained as they walked back toward the settlement, strength here isn't just about physical power. It's about understanding the fundamental laws that govern survival. Every creature on this world respects those laws because they understand the alternatives. Humans have forgotten that lesson, hidden behind their technology and political structures until they've become weak. Doctor, Captain said carefully, what you've accomplished here is remarkable, but you're still human. You belong with your own people. Stopped walking and turned to face her directly. For the first time since their arrival, she got a clear look at his eyes. They held intelligence and purpose, but also something that made her profoundly uncomfortable. This was not the gaze of someone who considered himself bound by human law or custom. My own people, he repeated. Tell me, Captain, when the Endeavor crashed, how quickly did the Council respond? How many resources did they commit to finding survivors? How long would they have searched before writing us off as acceptable losses? The uncomfortable silence that followed answered his questions more effectively than words could have. I thought so, continued. The Council operates on acceptable risk calculations and political expediency. This world operates on absolute truth, strength, adaptation, and the will to survive. Which system do you think produces better results? The final demonstration came when agreed to accompany the rescue team back to their ship for discussions about his future. Captain hoped that getting him off the planet's surface might restore some of his human perspective. Instead, she discovered just how far his transformation had progressed. The moment stepped aboard the Redemption, every predator instinct the crew possessed began screaming warnings. He moved through the corridors like he owned them, his presence commanding attention and respect in ways that had nothing to do with rank or protocol. Crew members found themselves stepping aside without being asked, their body language unconsciously deferential to something they recognized as a superior predator. In the captain's ready room, surrounded by the familiar technology and comfort of human civilization, seemed more alien than ever. He examined their equipment with the critical eye of someone who understood both its capabilities and its limitations. When offered a chair, he remained standing, positioned where he could observe all entrances while keeping his back to a wall. You want me to return to human space, he said without preamble. To abandon everything I've built here for the safety of Council protection. But tell me, Captain, what exactly does the Council offer that I don't already have? Security, Captain replied. Medical care, the company of your own species, a place in human society. Security, Slav held no humor. I command the respect of apex predators that could tear through your ship's hull with their bare claws. Medical care, I've adapted to survive in conditions that would kill a human in hours. The company of my own species. He gestured toward the bulkheads that separated them from the crew. I've spent 10 minutes on this ship and already identified 7 tactical weaknesses and 3 crew members who pose potential security threats. Is this the level of competence I should aspire to? The conversation continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Had evolved beyond the need for human approval or protection. He'd found something on this world that human civilization couldn't offer: absolute clarity of purpose and the power to enforce his will on his environment. When the Redemption finally departed Prime, it carried detailed reports about an impossible human adaptation and a recommendation that the planet remain off-limits indefinitely. But it departed without Doctor, who stood on a ridge overlooking his domain and watched the ship disappear into hyperspace. Beside him and the other Alliance leaders waited for his judgment. They had seen him interact with his own species and witnessed their departure. The message was clear. The soft civilization that had produced him was not worthy of his continued loyalty. Drew the sword that had become the symbol of his authority, its blade catching the alien sunlight and casting rainbow patterns across the landscape. Below them, the settlement bustled with activity as dozens of species worked together under his leadership. Beyond that, his territory stretched to the horizon, a domain earned through strength and maintained through constant vigilance. "They chose to leave me here once," he said, speaking to his allies in the complex mix of sounds and chemical signals they used for important communications. "Now they choose to leave me here again. Perhaps it's time we showed them what they've abandoned." The sword sang its deadly song as began planning not just for survival, but for expansion. This world had forged him into something new, something that understood power in ways that soft civilization never could. Soon, the galaxy would learn what humanity could become when it stopped pretending that strength was optional. The rescue ships had come and gone, but Doctor remained, no longer the man who had crashed on this world, but the apex predator it had created. And in the growing shadows of the alien evening, he began to plan for the day when he would return to human space not as a rescued survivor, but as a conqueror carrying the sword forged from the bones of a Warworld's greatest predators.